Today, we are gathered here to dive deep into the complex yet critical intersections between climate change, mental health, gender, and young people. A very timely but also very urgent topic. So we all know that climate change affects everybody. However, all of those effects are felt in it affects everybody yet, but not equally. Vulnerabilities to climate change, they vary based on social factors such as gender, age, geography, and access to resources. Young people in Africa, especially, are, you know, especially those in marginalized communities, are on the front lines of these changes. These individuals are not only exposed to the risks of extreme weather events, but their health, education, and future opportunities are also often disproportionately affected. In this session, we will explore how extreme weather events, from droughts to floods and heat waves, create cascading effects on health, both mental and physical. We will also examine how these impacts are gendered, affecting young people differently, and how they deepen these existing inequalities. In this session, we are joined by a very lively, very fun panel, who Stanley will also have the pleasure of introducing. Um, I'd like to encourage anyone who has any questions, any feedback, to please make use of the chat features, and we will address all of these questions during the Q&A session of our program today. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Stanley, who is going to take you through the program of the day. Over to you, Stanley. You're on mute, Stanley.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that we are grateful to have each one of you in this conversation. It's a conversation that we are really happy to be undertaking, all of us. The young people have prepared, and they are more than willing to share their expertise and their lived experiences from the topic that we are going to discuss. So I'm going to introduce our panel. The first person I will introduce is Dr. Patricia Banyayaki. Is a development economist, gender and policy specialist. She has vast experience in gender equity, social inclusion, and climate policy research, capacity development and advocacy in Africa at local, subnational, national, and regional level. She is the current GESI lead for CDKN based at SSN. The second panelist we're gonna introduce is Sylvia. Sylvia is a PhD candidate in psychology at the University of Ghana, focusing on the intersection of climate change, mental health, and sustainable practice among outdoor workers in Ghana. She leads the Climate Mental Health Initiative project, which addresses mental health challenges related to climate stressors in the coastal communities in Ghana. Sylvia is dedicated to advancing the understanding of non-economic impacts and intersectionality of climate change. Then we'll also be joined by Ida. Ida is an ecofeminist and climate storyteller based in Kenya. She is passionate about human rights for all, nature-based solution, sustainable living, and a united Africa. Then lastly, we'll hear from Nancy. Nancy is a young leader from Madagascar with a bachelor's in computer science, and with honor, she is passionate about, dedicated to environmental justice, leading to the EcoShip project, which she earned the Climate Justice Award from the CDKN program. So without much ado, gonna take a deep dive with Patricia. So Patricia, from your lived experience and from what you're passionate about, what is the intersectionality and why is it important to consider in the context of youth, climate change, and mental health? Over to you, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Stanley, for that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. It is indeed an honor for me to be part of this panel, and particularly to discuss this important topic of intersectionality in the context of youth, gender, but mostly focusing on youth, climate change, and mental health. So to answer your question, I'll start by saying every one of us, every individual has multiple characteristics that define them. And these include, for instance, your gender, your age, your race, your education, socioeconomic status, the location where you're based, culture, ethnicity, and many other characteristics which define you. And the interplay of these characteristics create unique experiences that define whether you will have the status of being with power, privilege, or oppression, disadvantage, or discrimination. So intersectionality is that framework that enables us to understand how power structures interact with the individual's multiple characteristics to put them in that state of either oppression, power, discrimination, or disadvantage. So having explained that, I will say that intersectionality is very key because it helps to refine our understanding of marginalization. It moves us away from essentialism, where we tend to categorize social groups, let's say women, indigenous people, or youth as homogeneous categories, to allowing us to recognize that there is diversity within each of these social groups, so that when we are devising policies and climate action, we do it with a better informed perspective or grounding. So having understood that, I'll now explain why I think it is important to apply an intersectional approach when dealing with youth, climate change, and mental health. Broadly, we may define youth as the period of transition where people are moving from being dependent to becoming independent, or moving from childhood to adulthood. From practice, we do realize that the term youth or young people has various meanings depending on the context. And we can also see that even when they are defining the age category of youth, there are also differences. For instance, UN organizations look at the bracket of 15 to 24, while the African Union considers youth to be the bracket of 15 to 35 years of age. So being a stage of transition, we can already see that youth are a diverse and dynamic group. From already, they are a diverse and dynamic group if we look at it from the differences that they have. We have already looked at the age group. That age group has a lot of dynamism, because we see there are differences in terms of gender, in terms of education. There are people in school, those who are out of school. There are those who are employed, those who are unemployed. There are the married youth, the unmarried youth, and so many other characteristics, also including their location, where they are based and the like. So with that, it underscores that we cannot look at youth or treat youth as an homogeneous group. Rather, we must take into consideration the diversity that exists when we are coming up with policies and any other youth-focused interventions. And intersectionality is the framework that helps us to understand that and apply appropriately to have more effective and inclusive climate policy and action. So when we come to the topic of the day, which is focusing on extreme weather events, climate-related natural disasters, and gradual climatic and environmental changes. All these we see have an impact on livelihoods as well as physical and mental health. So we see effects following a disaster, such as destruction of infrastructure, like buildings, roads, and power supply, for instance, loss of livelihoods, loss of food. We also have displacement of families, disruption of family functioning. All these have effects on mental health. And depending on the unique circumstances or experiences of the youth, or even stage of life at which they are, because we've already noted that some are dependents, others are already decision makers. They will have various challenges which cannot all be boxed into one solution fits all youth when addressing climate. When addressing issues to do with building resilience, of climate resilience of the youth. So I'm sure my fellow panelists will expand more on the intersections of climate change, youth, and mental health. So I will stop here mainly by underscoring that the diversity amongst youth must be taken into consideration. It must be understood and taken into consideration because they are a critical social group. And if we are building policy and interventions to build their climate resilience, then intersectionality will be very useful as an approach to aid effective social inclusion. Thank you, Stanley.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for that informed discussion and reminding us that intersectionality is the framework and youth cannot be treated as a homogeneous group. There is diversity and there are dynamic people that we need to consider very many other aspects as we create policies and as we devise actions for the young people. So without saying much, I want to welcome Sylvia, who will also set the scene for us and also clarify for us, based on her experience from the Climate Mental Health Initiative project that she's been doing, what challenges do young people face regarding their psychological well-being from climate-related stressors, and how can we support them to address this? Over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Stanley, and I'm so happy to be here. And the Climate Mental Health Initiative project actually addresses a critical yet often overlooked aspects of climate change, that's its impact on mental health. And this initiative, funded by the CDKN, was carried out in a poor urban coastal community called Shabu in Accra, Ghana. And for people living in these communities, they face the direct impact of climate change, like floods, the increase like floods because of the sea level rise and rising temperatures, and all these physical impacts actually exacerbate their mental health challenges. When we talk about the youth in Shabu actually they face heightened anxiety, stress, depression, as well as a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness due to the distraction caused by the flood. And most of the time, their livelihoods are being destroyed, their homes are being destroyed, and they have limited resources to actually cope with these challenges, particularly when it comes to financial resources. They have limited financial resources to even relocate or migrate from these communities to other communities. And most of them, the business that they are engaged in, they are engaged in fishing, and the destruction of the sea also affects them. And they also engage in small scale businesses, like small scale trading. And when the floods destroys their business, they are just left with nothing but to think about what to do next. And this distracts their ability to even focus on their future plans and what the future holds for them. There's also uncertainty about when and how or when the floods will actually come again. They mostly feel very powerless of their situation, and this fosters a sense of helplessness. Additionally, they have limited financial resources to actually seek for immediate psychological support, and this actually exacerbates their psychological challenges. With all this said, what can we do to help the youth in communities like this? I believe that we can support them by providing them with climate change education and also psychological support, giving them psychoeducation and psychotherapy to enhance their coping strategies and to build psychological resilience with them so that when these climate-related stresses come, they'll be able to deal with them. And also we have to encourage them in community-based climate change actions and decision-making processes so that they will feel part of the solution. And this will reduce the problem of they feeling left out and they feeling that nothing can be done. And so it will help them to actually make them feel part of the solution. Another thing too we can do is to incorporate mental health support into the climate resilient programs, and this will also help them to build psychological resilience. And finally, we can support them by providing alternative livelihoods for them and giving them educational opportunities, and this will help them see the other side of life and improve their psychological well-being as well. So I believe these are some of the supports that we can give to these young people so that collectively we can all live sound and help build Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for that comprehensive intro to mental health and the work that you're doing and some of the actions that we can take as a collective into building resilience among the young people, which you've brought really out is by building hope, trust and relationship with the young people so that they are comfortable and they are able to speak more into what is affecting them. And now it's my humble request to introduce my co-panelist, that is Sino, who is going to introduce the other two panelists. Over to you, Sino.
Thank you, Stanley. Good afternoon or evening, everyone. So the next speaker we have is Ida. Ida is an ecofeminist and climate storyteller based in Kenya. She is passionate about human rights for all, nature-based living, and a united Africa. Our question to Ida is, how does a lack of awareness or education exacerbate the effects of extreme weather events? In what ways are women and gender minorities particularly vulnerable to these effects? Thank you.
Thank you, Sino. So through my work with my ecofeminist nature-based group, I'd say there is a total lack of awareness of what happens and the co-occurring factors that cause this. So Kenya recently suffered floods, and of course people in the lower economic areas were most hit by these. But then when you talk to these people, especially the young people, the young women, they have no idea the context that this happened. They have no idea that there's city zoning rights and political issues that put them in these areas, make them especially vulnerable to this. So when addressing these issues, it's very surface. It's very, oh, I lost my house in a flood, I need a different house. But maybe you move to a different house and keep living the exact same lifestyle that degrades the environment, voting for the exact same leaders that bring policies which are actually destructive to you. So I think in order to address the root causes, we need to really make people aware of the economic context, the political context, the environmental context in which these climate disasters occur, because they don't just occur in a silo, they occur in hyper-capitalist, hierarchical, patriarchal power structure that we live in. And until we're aware of that, we will never actually address the root causes. And when we think of vulnerable or minorities such as women, young women, people of living in lower economic status, there's a lot of comorbidities that are happening. And so when a natural disaster hits, it's not just a natural disaster to you. Let's say this is a woman who is a young single mother. She is depending on someone else or has a very little income, or this is an LGBT person who is already facing social exclusion, financial exclusion. They've been disowned by their family. They're not able to get a job. When a natural disaster hits, it hits us 10 times harder because already maybe we're not part of a society that's organizing to bring resources, or we're not able to get a job, to relocate or find any alternatives. And you'll find amongst young people, especially, let me speak for Kenyan society, it leads into deteriorating into a life of, let me say, drugs and alcohol, because what other alternatives do you have? The society doesn't support you, no one will hire you. So I feel like when addressing climate disasters with young people, gender minorities, we need to think of it in a very holistic way: economic regeneration, social regeneration, and natural regeneration. We have to address all the root causes of these issues to make people properly resilient. People have to be able to earn an income. They have to have a social fabric that supports them and doesn't persecute them, as well as an environment that is actually taken care of by those who it is meant to be taken care of. And all this in a context of education and awareness. And this way people are actually able to understand what is happening to them and how best to go about it. That's my contribution. Thank you so much, Sinu.
Thank you, Ida. So just a recap of that, it's very important that we all understand in the world, understand our parts to play when it comes to actually addressing the issue of climate change. Otherwise, to do it in silos, then it defeats the purpose. And what I'm getting from your presentation is that once we understand how once everyone understands how they fit into the picture, then it makes it easier to work together to solve this climate crisis. Thank you, Ida. I'll move on to our next speaker, Nancy. Nancy, our question to you is, how do extreme weather events disproportionately impact young women? And how is the EcoShe project raising awareness to address these vulnerabilities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sino, for these really important questions. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So in terms of extreme weather events, it have, and we see it everywhere, it has severe consequences for everyone in every aspect of their life, but especially in young women. And in Madagascar, we can see cyclones and droughts. And apart from that, these events have dangerous and negative effect on health issues. They also reduce economic opportunities and also hinder access to education. So for example, a study by the World Bank found that climate-related disaster can lead up to 20% increase in school dropouts among young girls due to increased household responsibility or displacement for them house. But not only that, but also in terms of health, young women are often left vulnerable during extreme weather events due to lack of access to menstrual hygiene products, for example. And with our Pads for Her initiative, we are trying to address this need by providing sustainable pads to women. And it's also eco-friendly, as traditional disposable pads are often made of plastic. And we know that plastic can take up to 500 to 800 years to decompose. And yeah, it contributes significantly to environmental pollution. In terms of economy now, women are frequently the first to lose their livelihoods during climate disasters. Of course, everyone, but we see particular studies in women. And at EcoShe, we try to empower young women by training them in advocacy, storytelling, and negotiation skills related to climate justice and gender equality. Of course, it won't solve the entire problem, but yeah, this training will equip them to engage with decision makers and raise awareness in their communities and effectively advocate for their rights. So thank you so much for CGK and for supporting this project. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy. And it's great to hear about the lovely work that you're doing and just the little that you're doing in your community to help empower young women so that they too can actually take care and be able to live on in this climate crisis. I'm going to hand over back to my co-facilitator, Stanley, to introduce the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sino, for that engaging panelist, and thank you to all our young people and Patricia for your contribution. So I'm going to hand over to Zizi, who has been checking the questions that have been sent in, and we can have our panelists respond to them. Over to you, Zizi.
Hi everyone. So we have a question in the chat, and the question is addressed to Sylvia. The question reads, how can climate change policies be designed to better address the specific vulnerabilities faced by young women, non-binary, and LGBTQ plus individuals during extreme weather events? So Sylvia, that one is addressed to you.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you, Karen, for the question. So I'm
continuum, which looks at efforts along a continuum from gender, of course I'll leave out the gender neutral, to gender responsive or gender sensitive, gender responsive, and then gender transformative. Now the question is more related to transformation, because you're talking about getting communities to accept that there is need to change the status quo of how traditional roles are viewed in order to have women participate more and benefit more and be more equal compared to the other, to men and other groups. So one of the ways in which we can best do this is because you can't, it's normally any approach that immediately goes for transformation without first understanding the community in which you're operating was definitely met by resistance. So in many cases, it is important for you to, after you have done a gender analysis and understood where the issues are, understood where the inequalities lie and what is perpetuating them, then it becomes important for you to start possibly through gender responsive approaches, where you slowly get the communities to appreciate, for instance, the positives or the benefits that would come out of them giving women more space, having men maybe participate in some of the traditional roles that women do. And then slowly, as the community appreciates that when they do this, they're actually more economic benefits, everybody is able to get to a better place than they were before, then slowly you can now bring in the transformation approaches, the gender transformative approaches. And these are those that seek to question the unequal, the issues that are bringing in the inequality that are causing unequal rights, and then tackling them accordingly. But all this must be done hand in hand with the community. You move in together with them so that they appreciate, own, and do not resist when the changes happen. Thank you so much, Susie.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And really, we can't run away from how big and how important the role of community is. And then we have one last question, and I think either Sylvia, Ida, or Nancy can take this one. It says, what role do youth movements, particularly those led by young women and non-binary individuals, play in influencing national and global climate policies?
I think I can contribute briefly to this. So I think we're seeing much more youth engagement at high-level policy conferences and workshops at COP. We have youth panels and youth assemblies. And when we look at Africa specifically demographically, majority of us are youth. Uganda, where I'm from, it is 70% youth. And so all these policies are actually for us, and we're the ones who are going to be living them out and being impacted by them. And so 100% we should contribute to them and have our voices be heard in them. And I would say, from my vantage point, it's looking positive. I think there's a lot of youth engagement, and we strive to make it much more meaningful and actually applied. So not just listening, but actually applying the things that we contribute.
Thank you so much, Ida. I have one question, and I think anyone from the panel can take it. It's so I was wondering, how can we move beyond treating gender as a binary in climate change discourse to ensure that non-binary and transgender young people are also considered in resilience planning initiatives in general? So my question is not directed to anyone in particular. Anyone who would like to take it can.
All right, I'll start, and probably my colleagues will also join. It brings me back to the discussion that I started with. Intersectionality is the way to go, because as we are right now, in many countries, when they're looking at their policies and the target groups, they will mainly just look at men, women, youth, but youth is still a loose term because, like we saw, it cuts across so many ages, and yet there are varying needs, priorities, and expectations. Now, intersectionality helps us now understand, because now we go into each of those, the broad categories that are there of the traditional gender, male, female. Because again, another thing that we need to appreciate is that the policies or whatever measures we come up with that are gender related must be context specific. We cannot run away from that. So that means that when you are in a community, you need to do a thorough gender analysis. And in that gender analysis, you'll be able to identify, before you even do anything, make any plans, you need to identify all the categories of individuals that fit into that category of exclusion. So should those, the non-binary, be within that community, you need to identify them as a separate subcategory that stands out. And now, after you have done the identification, and it has to be thorough and exhaustive, you should not, because we said intersectionality brings together the multiple characteristics that people identify with, that define people. So you will go deeper as you have identified them as a category or a group, to understand from their perspective where their issues are. and the nature and extent of vulnerability that they are facing. Then it is upon that there are some gender analytical tools that are used. For instance, gender-based analysis plus allows us to get all that intersectional related information and properly, I would say, tabulate it or organize it in such a way that you critically get out all the issues for all the subgroups that have been identified, so that when you come up with designing policies or measures to address the issues you've identified, they are all inclusive. So that's what I'll say. I'll hand over to my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patricia. I definitely feel that you have answered my question. So I would like to thank you, the speakers, and I'd also like to thank the audience for the very thoughtful and engaging questions on this session. And thank you once again to our speakers. It's always inspiring to see the depth and understanding and passion that each of you always bring to these very vital conversations. I would like to hand over to my colleague Stanley, who is going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Zizi, and thank you everyone for your questions. And thank you, speakers, for responding to that. Now we've gotten an overview from our different speakers from diverse countries, diverse ages. Now it's about time that we also hear from someone who's been engaged in both climate change and mental health conversation. And this will be Professor Gary Belklin, who is the director, Billion Minds Institute, and chair of Care of People and Planet, COP Squared, and assistant professor, Social Medical Sciences, Columbia University, Mailman School of Public Health, a psychiatrist who approaches mental health as a building block of social policy and progress. He founded Billion Mind as a think action tank. The intention of Billion Mind is to link mental health to problems of great scale, specifically to those of climate crisis, and to safeguard sustainable societies through a human social climate. So, Prof, based on your vast experience in mental health and climate change, as well as your role as the chair of COP Squared, where do you think we should go from here? What are your thoughts on the panelist ideas, and what opportunities do you see in the intersection of climate, gender, and mental health? Professor, over to you.
Great. And Stanley and the panel and everyone at CDK and the Resilience Hub, thanks for including me in this conversation. It was great to listen to, because I think where we need to go next is where everybody is already going. But we need to bend key power structures and funding streams to those directions. So just a brief summary of what I do, which Stanley mentioned briefly. So I'm a psychiatrist, but I've mostly worked in public health roles and policy roles. I was New York City, where I'm based, mental health commissioner, but I've also worked 20, 30 years widely in sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean with health NGOs, with development projects, really in ways where mental health was integrated into other social purposes. And so I really became a big believer that that's the best way to do mental health work, is in ways that help people do other things. And so really sort of got out of the medical model and really thought about, okay, how is the toolkit of mental health and psychological strengthening of value for social progress and agency and collective efficacy and action. And so a process that Billion Minds led with the COP Squared network that Stanley mentioned, hundreds of organizations globally, the UNFCCC champions team, we coordinated with their Race to Resilience key partners and aligned organizations, subject matter experts globally, grassroots organizations. We developed a strategy for how global mobilization around growing capacity for climate resilience should integrate capacity for growing psychological resilience. And so we were approaching psychological resilience then in a very pragmatic way. It wasn't like a thing, a defined state of mind. It's actually a process for applying a lot that we know about psychological well-being, mental health, behavior, etc., applying it hyper-locally in ways that people feel they need those things to cope with, act on, change the circumstances of climate impacts where they live. So it's a very pragmatic, applied way that we called a roadmap for care, that psychological tools help care, reduce distress, et cetera, but also help people drive change. So care and change. And I really felt my big takeaway from this panel was just real critical from the ground endorsement of the fact that it's not just psychological strengthening that needs to be done if we're going to tackle the mental health end. It's that should also contribute to participatory strengthening and participatory resilience and empowerment more broadly. Everyone really laid out that case. It was wonderful, starring Patricia and your notion of intersectionality and a cost of it in marginalizing youth as a power center, also homogenizes youth as a voice. Whereas I found in working with youth is that they especially get this enlarged sense of psychological resilience as really contributing to social resilience that I was mentioning. They get it right away and they apply it right away. The real inventive ways, such as Sylvia's work, incorporates at one and the same time mental health support with solidarity building and action growing. And that's really the way mental health should work. Ida, I'm sorry if I got your name. Ida really expanded that whole part. Surfacing the environmental harm of conditions is related to the economic, political power conditions. And those fuel distress and mental health vulnerabilities, but also show why it's so important to not just look at the mental health toolkit as a distress cushion, but as a social strengthening value add, and to implement it that way. Nancy, surfacing, as did much of the chat, about how all that plays out, as do all the burdens of climate change, how those play out mostly on the backs and shoulders of women in climate-affected areas and globally. And the effort I described, this roadmap strategy we developed for how to integrate psychological resilience, led to what we call early adopter efforts with large multi-regional NGOs working on climate resilience, with UN agencies, with local governments. And most of these have women at the backbone. They really are putting these principles of applied psychological resilience to work. They not only carry a lot of the burdens, but they really do the communal work of holding a community emotionally together. And so all of our approaches involve transferring skills of psychological work from people like me, psychologists, psychiatrists, clinicians, et cetera, to community members so that they're really owning it to use it for these other ways that it values their communal strengthening. And women are at the front of that skill transfer and owning those. So, my takeaway is the same that I started, but I think it's really been exemplified in the sum of the parts that you've really brought together wonderfully here. That if we're going to talk about mental health and climate change, we have to talk not just about mental health, mental strain, psychological resilience, but are we implementing those in ways that contribute to social health, social cohesion, participatory strength, participatory resilience? And what I'm saying is we know how to do it that way. I grew up learning from the global mental health field just how much of the skills of both mental health care and ways that mental health help people have agency for change are done through skills and leadership and co-creation with community members. And that's the way we have to do it. And so that's where funding for locally led climate adaptation needs to also go. There is psychological loss and damage and psychological strengthening investments that those streams of finance should also empower what we've been talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gary. That was quite insightful. I think I take from your remarks, I take solidarity building and action growing. That was quite profound. And also, as much as we talk about psychological resilience, it's also about us considering how we implement and actionize this. I hear there is a question for you. Maybe we can quickly have it, and then we can have a final remark from all our speakers. Over to you, Zizi, for that.
Okay, the question in the chat for Prof. Gary says, how do we balance immediate health crisis caused by extreme weather events, for example, injury, infectious diseases, with the long-term mental health challenges on young people, on the mental health challenges young people face due to climate anxiety and trauma? Over to you, Prof. Gary.
Yeah, so my initial reaction is that we are just forgetting about, in the larger global discussion about climate resilience, is that, it takes resilient people to have a resilient and to steward a resilient climate. And so health, I worry, has been talked about, is getting more attention, but is talked about in ways that aim way too low for what that should mean, what investments in health infrastructure should mean. And that really seem to double down on this idea that health systems are the major source of health. It's community members and community systems and community action that is the source of health, and health systems should be part of empowering, enabling, supporting them. And so I don't think it's a competition between certain health, and that often happens. There's this, if we put dollars in health here, then it doesn't go to mental health there. If we put it in there, it goes somewhere else. Whereas the thing is, what we have to do is fund and organize and enable and empower communities in ways where they're growing health, well-being, and personal resilience, social resilience at one and the same time.
Thank you so much, Professor Gary. Stanley, I'm going to hand over back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for your response, Prof. I think on this particular stage, I want us for the panelists to give their final remark, and as you do that, I would also want you to do a call for those of us who will be attending COP, for those of us who will, who are committed to seeing that all this conversation is had in a decision-making table. So I will start with you, Patricia. What are your final remarks, and what should we take to COP?
Thank you very much, Stanley. My final remark is that intersectionality is a very crucial framework that we have to apply to advance gender equality or equity and social inclusion. Because if we do not consider intersectionality, as we have seen from our discussion today, we run the risk of creating secondary marginalization, where we continue to design policies, measures, interventions on the basis of the privileged, because you find most of these policies are designed on who is more vocal, and we neglect the interests of the most impacted by climate change disasters. So intersectionality is key and needs to be done. It's not something that is, it's quite expensive to do, because it makes the study broader when you're doing your gender analysis, but it is crucial if we want to see changes on the ground. And I think that's the message I would push. for even COP, because we need to move away from just focusing on capacity building. Yes, capacity building is crucial when we are looking at gender, but we need to move forward to have more results on the ground, and we are going to get this done by doing more practical measures on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patricia, for that. And from Patricia, we'll go to Ida. Ida, over to your final remark and the message that you want to carry to COP.
Thank you, Stanley. So I give my background, but I continue to call to look at these affected persons, gender minorities, women, as holistic beings with holistic needs. So not just environmental, but also social, economic, etc., etc. Like true resilience, I think it's a very holistic thing, and that needs to be looked at in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida. Nancy, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stanley. So on our way to COPs, as long as there is life, there is hope. So I believe it's crucial, not to give up too soon, no matter how challenging the fight against climate change might seem. And I truly envision a resilient future where young women and other genders are empowered to rise as leaders in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy. Sylvia, over to you.
Thank you, Stanley. So my remark would just be that climate change, as we've all discussed today, and based on the conversation that is happening globally, clearly indicates that it's not only an environmental issue, but also a social and a psychological issue. And so I believe this kind of awareness should be heightened, so particularly in Africa, in Ghana, so that we have this awareness about the fact that it's not only an environmental issue, but also a psychological issue in my perspective, and that the non-economic impacts of climate change, like mental health, should be taken into consideration in all these discussions, and funds should also be allocated to help some of these people who have been displaced or have migrated because of some of these climate-related stresses. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. And finally, Prof. Gary.
So I'll just echo again, that there's no climate resilience without social and psychological resilience. And we have to get specific and sophisticated about what we mean by that and intentional about building that. Mental health tools and methods and purposes are a key part of that. But by seeing those as means to these other ends of growing collective agency, that shines a light on the added importance of these other things that were talked about early on, of just greater participation in decision making and planning responses. We can talk about climate adaptation as a village effort. It happens with people going through great changes together, and we have to equip them to do that, but therefore to be part of decision making.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for this great opportunity to share insight, to share your thoughts. For those of us who've sent questions and haven't been answered, we look forward into sitting with the panelists over here, answering them and sharing them with each one of you via our social media, the CDKN website. We will keep on sharing the more information on what we get from this session. Big thank you to the organizers of the Resilience Hub, the virtual event. It's been great. It's a great honor to have young people share their thoughts, share how much they feel, what they are doing in their own spaces. And yeah, it's one of great step into influencing change. Mental health is real, climate change is real. We all need to come up together and build resilience and take actions towards that. In case of any questions, We'll be sharing the email addresses for all the panelists for you to reach out to them in case of connections. And yeah, feel free to come to us. And thank you all for joining our session. Thank you very much.